That helped.
Hello, welcome to Dive into Worldbuilding. Here we are chit-chatting about various things on a Tuesday afternoon, and today we're talking about confusion. And the first thing that came to mind for me was Confuse a Cat by Monty Python. But we're not confusing cats today. We're confusing readers today. Or not. Do we want to confuse our readers or not? Well, so my general rule is we can confuse readers, but we should confuse them only when we want to.
Mm-hmm.
Intentional confusion.
Right. Intentionally confusing readers is okay. Accidentally confusing readers, not so great.
So, well, and as a reader, it's kind of hard to tell which is which sometimes.
Yeah. And so why would we want to confuse a reader as opposed to intriguing the reader?
Well, so
and what do you mean by the word confuse?
Well, have them feel disoriented.
I think disorient's a better and more neutral term than confused. Confused sounds malicious or a loss of control that doesn't quite capture. Disorientation sounds much more literary. So I think we should use disorient.
So let's decide on that terminologically and say, no, you never want to confuse a reader, but you might want to disorient
them. Yes.
Okay. And I think disorientation of a reader can be extremely good because, especially, that's the thing we talk about all the time is a reader comes in from their culture. And if the story doesn't go in the direction they're expecting culturally or historically in terms of the things they've read, they might be a little disoriented. So, let's do that.
Well, and there's also intentionally disorienting the reader by having an unreliable narrator.
So we can be plonked down into an unfamiliar setting, or we can be plonked down into an unfamiliar character. We can be plonked down into an unfamiliar narrative pattern. We can also be situated inside a narrator who is not reliable.
Yeah.
None of my narrators are reliable.
So,
put that up front.
Well, reliable and objective, but also, reliable is a thing.
Well,
but if you can't
always has to be wrong to some extent.
Yeah. So deliberately disorienting a reader has to be from within the story, because if it's you can't deliberately disorient somebody in terms of their expectations unless you know what their expectations are going to be.
True.
Well,
so
you can anticipate expectations. I'm going to mention the name of the author who, as of recording this last weekend, got himself into deep doo-doo. That would be George R.R. Martin. And I'm going to mention a Game of Thrones here. And a Game of Thrones disorients and deceives the reader of its expectations on a number of character and narrative beats that surprised me back in 1997. In retrospect, they look great, but back then I was like, wait, what? I mean, the wolves don't mean anything. They're supposed to be the companions of the kids, and you're going to kill the main character? What the heck? I mean, in retrospect, it all makes sense, especially if you look at things through lenses of other genres, like, say, romance tropes or young adult, where of course you're going to kill off the parent. That's just logical. But from a epic fantasy standpoint, he pulled the rug out from the reader again and again in the novel.
So genres come with expectations for sure.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think the constant playing with sort of caste and class during Firefly around Morena Baccarin's character is another, the reader's expecting one thing out of that role and they're getting something completely different.
Yes.
Can you elaborate, please?
She was a sex worker, but she was also the person who had the highest political chops.
Mm-hmm.
And she was the one who knew how to behave at a fancy party. No one else could.
Yes.
So
Oh, boy.
she got them into a lot of the like
Anywhere.
legitimate places they needed to be, because her status as that was far higher than anybody else on the ship, which is not what we would expect out of that.
And she got them out of some hot water that way too.
Mm-hmm.
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 Cool.
Yeah,
So,
a
yeah.
companion. Why do I not
Mhm.
remember her name?
Well, that's why I used her real name, because I can't remember either.
Inara.
Thank you.
Yes.
I should
yeah.
know that. It's my friend's kid's name. Hello. But yeah, Inara. I'm trying to think of another one.
Or
Go
even a narrative or a narrative expectation poll. I mean, we're sticking in the Firefly universe. Spoilers for Serenity. I'm a leaf upon the wind.
Yes.
You don't
well,
expect him to get skewered and die. It's like,
yeah.
I know it's a very Josh Whedon thing,
Mhm.
Yeah.
but in the general run of things, you don't expect him to go through and then suddenly, in the blink of an eye, go like that.
Yeah, and the only decent male character Joss ever wrote. Well, other
Yeah.
than Giles.
Yes.
Giles was okay. But yeah.
He had his no, he was
So yeah, there's a bunch of ways that we can confuse the reader. Unfortunately, I don't see a whole lot of that going on in television. There's not a lot of subverting that. Pretty much what you see is what you get. Black people always die first, that whole thing. It works for the Umbrella Academy. It works for the one it doesn't work for is it's a Canadian show about a biracial pair of basically demon killers people, but they're faking not, and they have their kids. October something.
The October faction.
Thank you. That is
I haven't seen
actually
that yet.
a pretty good stab at we're not going to be racist, sexist, homophobic, all this stuff. We're going to try really hard, and they don't suck at it.
Yeah. Now, is there going to be a second season?
I believe yes, there is. Although we didn't know this until a few months ago, I think.
Yeah. Of course, a few months ago, who knows when.
Who knows?
But
yeah.
But yeah, that was the only quarrel that I can remember having with that is kind of a spoiler. So, and it's a trivial quarrel. It's very very specific. So I don't want to spoil it for any of you who haven't seen it. And,
Okay, well, email me later.
So let's talk about times when you might want to have the reader share the disorientation of the character.
When you're setting up like a reveal, so you want them to not know just as much as you don't know, or as
I'm
much as the
tempted to
character.
talk about I'm tempted to spoil a book here. I'm afraid to, because it does it so well.
Book.
Velocity Weapon by Megan O'Keefe.
Never heard of it. Okay.
I've heard of it.
You've read it, Julia?
I started it.
Okay. I don't know if you've gotten to the point where the rug gets pulled out from under you. And it's for the reader and also for the character at the same time. They go, holy crap. I mean, there are a couple of things going, but I'm speaking in very general terms, listeners, because you actually should read this book. It's really good. And the sequel just came out, which I haven't read yet. It's called Chaos Vector. It's on my to-read list. Anyway, so the character is in a situation which they think they understand. There are slight hints now in retrospect that things aren't quite what they seem. And then suddenly the character and the reader realize, no, this is not what they thought it was. And it's brilliantly done. I mean, there was a thing going around like, oh, you've reached that page in the book, have you? Yes, I have.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah. So,
that-
so using restricted points of view, third person restricted points of view is a really good way to withhold information from a reader without feeling disingenuous.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
you're playing fair that way.
Yeah, you know, because there is that factor where people will feel very much like indignant, like they've been manipulated if you put them in a situation where they expect that they should have been able to know that information, but you withheld it.
Right.
But so like for my buck, I say, well, you know, let's give you a character who doesn't know the thing that the reader is not supposed to know.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And yeah.
They can't withhold information they don't have.
Right.
Yeah. And then there's another way of doing it is, if I recall correctly, Nicole Corner Stace in The Archivist Wasp.
Mm-hmm.
The characters are living in the present. They're present. They may or may not know or care whether the reader understands which present or future this is, because it doesn't matter to them. It only matters to the reader.
Yeah.
And so she gets away with a whole lot of sort of foreshadowing and world building that you don't even understand is happening at the time that you read it the first time. And then when it all comes together and you realize that this past is connected to this future and you're in it too, it's a lovely moment. And she's a lovely, lovely author, and you should read more of her stuff.
Yeah. So I also like to do special effects, like point of view special effects, like internal points of view when the character is high for some reason, or has been knocked on their ear for some reason, or is regaining consciousness for some reason. And those things are disorienting, but they're deliberately disorienting, right?
Yeah.
So like there's a scene in Cold Words when Ruli, who's the main character, is getting high and he gets a little kooky. And I try to do that with internalization of the voice and show how his thoughts are getting out of control and his behaviors are getting out of control. And I try to keep the reader grounded by making sure that there's somebody in the interaction who is not high so that you can continue to see what that person says and how that person reacts. And that gives you a sort of an anchor to kind of pull yourself through the wildness of the point of view character's thoughts.
A baseline, yeah.
Yeah, something like oh yeah, that guy is okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, because otherwise you have no reference point for a reader to hook onto. Is like, okay, so they're out of sorts, but in relation to what? And so I mean, it's the whole contrast thing. So you can contrast it with what is a more stable, neurally grounded person to see what's and to see like, oh nope, they're definitely high as a kite, and this is what's happening. They're tasting colors where they never could taste colors before. Okay, that's not normal.
Well, I'm finding myself during this conversation, I want to write a character who is like pre-diabetic, but the viewpoint. So your idea of what they are seeing differs according to their glycemic index. So maybe they're really, really happy, and maybe it's just because they really need some orange juice. So there's that, and you know, you can stop a chapter right like in the middle of a sentence, pick it up in the next chapter because they passed out.
Yeah.
It would be kind of cool to just have a block of black text at the bottom finishing out the page of just like, yep, there you are.
Crash.
I
have now crashed. The end.
Pretty much. So yeah, there's, and you know, I think actually, oh God, I don't, I don't remember the name of the book now, but it's Kate Elliott and Jennifer Roberson, and
The Golden Kate.
thank you. Holy crap, is everybody unreliable in that? It just depends on what your viewpoint is and what you think you want to know at the time, because certain people only know certain stuff, and other people know what the other people know, but they don't know what the third and fourth and fifth people know. And okay, can I just say that was a really good book, and I need to read it again.
You can say everybody should be reading the book. I mean, yeah, it's back from the early 90s, but that's no excuse.
Yeah. It just I really, really loved that. And I didn't understand what it was when I picked it up at all. And I thought it was
I picked it up because at that time I had just discovered Kate Elling and started reading all of her backlog. I was like, oh, she wrote a book with the other two authors who I have not read yet. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah,
then I read some Robertson and Ron afterwards. So, kind of like split off that way.
Yep. And I've never read Robertson, and I've read very little else of Elliot, although I just bought a bunch of it. Because they're how they all write the same characters in completely compelling ways that don't seem like you're reading other people, but they did.
I wish I could get the three of them in a room and talk more about it. I really that's. I mean,
Yes,
I might be 20 years too late to do that, sadly. But yeah. I may not even think or remember. But I think a couple. I think Ron and Robertson wrote standalone sequels on their own to it. Yeah. Okay.
Yes,
I have not read them, but yeah.
I have one of them. I don't have. I think there's more than one, and I only have one of them. And I think I only have the Robertson one.
Yeah.
But I loved Melanie Ron. The Dragon Bowl thing was just nuts. I loved that. And that's another person who, like, we have been robbed of a bunch of her work because of depression, and that sucks.
Yeah.
Not to mention our field erasing female authors. Oh, yeah, female authors only started in the year 2000, don't you know? Anger, burning inside. Sorry.
Flames on the side of
flames. Thank you. The flames coming out of the side. It's like,
I'm just gonna be over here glaring in Judith Merrill. But yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of that happening right now, of people going, well, who can we look back at? And I've noticed that there's not a lot of scholarship on the people who weren't the big names, and so we don't really know who we missed. We don't know who we don't know. So again, one of the unreliable narrators is our idea of what the history of science fiction is.
And we've learned that a lot this weekend.
Yeah, within the last 72 hours in a big way, man. Dude.
Yep.
Wow. Yeah, that's just all creepy.
Well, I mean, so one of the reassuring things that it says to me is that there are many ladders to climb in the field, right? That people are climbing ladders all around us within their own sort of sub-communities, and that's great. And we shouldn't just nominate one ladder for being the one we talk about.
Well, yes.
Absolutely. That's disorienting to the entire field and skewing the entire field into one line that is artificial. And yeah, we need to pull the camera back, and I'll use the camera analogy. Instead of being focused telephoto on the one ladder that people talk about, we need to pull back and see there are tons of ladders climbing up this mountain.
Yeah.
We need that pullback.
Question for all of us then.
Mm-hmm.
If we're the people who are noticing this, and we're the people online live right now, here's my question to you. Would you guys be willing to participate in a bigger show about, okay, here are this year's nebulas, here are the people who are on them, blah, 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 for the top 8 awards, and not the Hugo?
Yes.
Okay. I'll put that together next year.
Absolutely.
Because why not?
Sure.
Okay.
All right.
Not sure. I mean, yeah, I feel like I kind of get what you're getting at, and it seems like a cool idea. So sure.
Well, yeah, because we like, everybody knows what the Hugos are, but they don't necessarily know the nebulas or how they're done, or I don't even know what the next 5 are. You know,
well, there's like the Philip K. Dick Award, and there's the Lando Award.
there's Locus.
There's the Locus Award.
And then there are local ones like the Endeavor Award and the Manly Wellman Award. There's lots of awards below the Hugo Awards that don't get talked about enough.
The Aurora Awards, which
Thank you.
Borealis Awards.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You have the Aurealis, the Ditmars, the Vogels, and that whole mess with what Conzealand did with the Vogels is more flames on the side of my head. Flames. So
Okay, the only part I know about this is Vogel is bird in German.
okay, so the Sir Julius Vogel Awards are New Zealand Science Fiction Awards.
That's why they were called the SJVs. I was like, did you
Yes.
guys miss a V and it's supposed to be
No.
a W? I don't know. Okay.
No. So they were supposed to provide a voting
And they
packet
didn't.
of that to all the Con Zealand members, and that did not happen.
Yeah.
Oops.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and my New Zealand writer friends are very unhappy about this with good reason.
Oh, they are. And making themselves known
Mhm.
loudly. Yeah. Saw that. It was like, wow. And yeah. Speaking of confusion,
Yeah, speaking of
don't
confusion and obfuscation, yes.
yeah, I just don't understand what happened. I don't understand how you have a country like New Zealand, which has just been basically porned over the widescreen for 87 films that were supposed to be 3. And everybody knows what it looks like now. Why would you not? I mean, that's one helicopter flight, 80 minutes of film. What are we talking here, guys? You know, like, how did you miss that? How did you miss all of that? How did you miss, here's every piece of really cool scenic, I don't know, scenery that wasn't in the Lord of the Rings.
Mm.
I've seen some of it.
about.
Yeah, I mean, it's a missed opportunity. There's tons of
Yeah.
New Zealand stuff that was not in the movies.
Yeah.
And more I didn't get to see because I didn't get to see the South Island. So yeah,
So yeah, that's a whole
that's a
thing.
whole other thing.
And it makes me wonder, if I had to write about this, what would be the effective viewpoint to choose? Omniscient, third person, second, first? Like, how would you tell this story in an effective way?
Well, you mean the story of current events?
Of the Hugos itself and what just happened. I'm sorry, yeah,
Yeah.
and what just
So-
happened.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, I think what you end up stuck with is a sort of sequence of subjective viewpoints.
Yeah.
I mean,
Well, unless you're going to invent an omnipotent person who was doing this on purpose.
Mm.
And why is Lucifer not a science fiction show? Anyway.
Moving along.
Moving on, should we go back to confusion?
Let's go back to confusion.
yeah, confusion. Confusion's good. Disorientation.
Disorientation, confusion.
So I kind of want to get into nitty gritty a little bit in terms. I want to do some text discussion stuff.
Oh, do it.
Let's lay down those fat beats.
Well, so I was thinking about subjectivity, which is point of view, right? And how thorough you can be with point of view, and how that grounds you in the character, but it does confuse you about certain kinds of things, right? And you have to sort of, using the camera metaphor again, you kind of have to zoom in close enough that you don't have a lot of extraneous information
Cluttering up your
intruding
field of view,
in,
yeah.
which would be undesirable confusion. Because like with Varan, there is so much information that could potentially be on that page. Oh my gosh, let's not. So I have to zoom in really, really close. But at the same time, you don't want it to be so minimalist that you can't figure out what's going on.
Right. I mean, to continue talking about your book, because we love to talk about your book, you have a close enough point of view on the three characters that you're not have extreme stuff, but it's wide enough that you're providing enough information to understand, to start building up an understanding of their actions and potential actions, and how they're going to react into the culture themselves, so that when Nicanor does his thing, you understand that, especially when he starts doing things neuroatypically, you start getting the feel from like, okay, that makes sense. If he's going to act that way, that makes sense. This is everything we've seen. You're unconfusing character.
So like this actually, you make me think of the question of bad guys who are just bad guys because they're bad guys.
Mustache twirling villains, yeah.
Yeah, and then like people who just sort of indiscriminately do all of the bad things because they are bad guys and they must do all of the bad things or they would not be bad guys. And that always drove me nuts.
Whoa!
Right? Oh, let me think of another bad thing that I could do. and so in some ways, and this is actually really important for transgressions of power, actually, where you're not in Nicanor's head at all. But Nicanor is a guy who is an antagonist, but he is just not a sort of indiscriminate bad guy character. And he's not going to do just all kinds of random bad stuff. He has these very particular concerns, and that means he's going to behave in these very particular ways. That means that certain kinds of options are off the table. Right? Mm-hmm. And personally, I find that when you have a set of restrictions that's principled, it's much more powerful because you're not just sort of indiscriminately doing like a bunch of bad stuff. You're more likely to do a very restricted set of things, some of which might not even be bad, right? They just might be idiosyncratic to this principle. And some of which might be very bad, but all of which make sense in a way. So you can actually sort of push it much further than you would. It's much more plausible, in fact, to be more extreme if you're going in that principled direction.
To use a D&D alignment, because I'm going to, lawful evil gets further results than chaotic evil. Lawful evil is principled, structured order, and can do things that chaotic evil, I'll go watch the world burn.
I hadn't thought about it that way. I had more thought about it where, people tend to think in certain ways and have a psychology and not just be like, I will do all of the bad things.
I will do all the bad things because I'm the Joker. Yeah. Versus Lex Luthor, who's going to, who's bad and has organized
I'm going to have this very particular set of goals, right?
You have goals.
Get in my way, I may do bad things.
Parameters that you can use to restrict how you attain those goals. And if not killing people is not one of your parameters, then you're free to kill people while you go achieve your goals.
Sure,
and
but like,
I just think that's a bad thing in most cases.
And so like, but like one of the things about Nicanor, to take him as a particular example, is he doesn't like mess.
No.
So like mess is anathema to him. So like he's not going to kill people unless he feels it's absolutely necessary. And he has no other options because mess.
Yeah, I mean, that sort of thing. I mean, it's like this is the way he gets thwarted, and when he gets thwarted, he gets like the locked door scene. It's like he's just like, so that you can't have that door closed. You just can't have that door closed. It's like,
or like you're not allowed to have that door open right now. Like,
yeah, they can't get a grip.
He can't.
But he can't. That's the tragic thing that humanizes him and makes me feel for him even though I don't want to. Like, oh, poor Nicanor. Good for you, even though you're the bad guy.
I wish he would stop making really bad decisions.
Stop ruining the bar. Stop ruining this world.
But
yeah, that doesn't resonate at all.
Nope.
Yep.
Nicanor reminds me of like the combination of gifs of the gif of the guy standing at the fence pulling on it going, "Let me in," and the other one of him going, "Let me out," and then just a picture of a cat in a doorway. Oh god.
Yeah.
Yep.
But yeah, I mean, so that's why I find him interesting. But he's got a very particular type of restricted viewpoint.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And
The only way you could write him or write around him. Yeah.
like he like you have to like shoot things that I think about when I work with Nicanor. One is Nicantor's hypotheses have to be largely correct.
Hmm.
We call it the Nicanor is always right rule. And it's like, you don't want him to be right, but he kind of has to be right.
Mhm.
Otherwise the story doesn't work nearly as well.
Story, yeah.
And he also tends to have shorter sentences. And the metaphors and similes and other comparisons that he makes are very, very restricted.
It's a very interesting way you restrict and orient the reader, not to disorient into a character without. I mean, you can understand what point of view you're in by the kind of text you have. And that's a really interesting ability you have, and you put it into mazes of power that way.
Well, so that's one of the things that allows the sense of cultural background in the character, I think, is what they choose to use as comparisons. Because we very often compare things to our background, like to our life experiences. And so typically the things that we compare things to are going to be, potentially quite different based on our life experiences.
Yeah.
I mean, there are what I would call sort of traditional metaphors that we all learn and that sort of help us to form a sort of shared metaphorical database.
Mm-hmm.
But I like to actually reduce that when I work with foreign people because
it
helps. It helps me keep people distinguished from one another. So it's an orientation.
Yeah.
I guess you could say.
Yeah, it's an orientation instead of disorientation.
Yeah, I would like to have an entire show where we discuss that alone.
Okay, let's do it.
Okay, put it down on the list.
I just have a ton of ideas about how that shared metaphorical database is it's overdetermined by what the shared metaphors are and how much of them we actually share. I know that I can go anywhere in the Western world and we're going to probably end up talking about metaphors in the Bible because it's one of the few books that we all have in common.
Yeah.
If I talk to somebody who has a master's degree, there's a certain amount of scholarship that we have done in common that I can rely that they have done.
Mm-hmm.
I know they've read these people. I know they've probably read these people for these reasons and on these particular subjects, like that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, there's a whole bunch of stuff about that, and that's actually one of the ways that you can do confusion is that you and people do this all the time. They put someone of one class into a completely other thing and make them look at it. And in that way, you're doing the as you know, Bob, but it doesn't sound like you're doing as you know, Bob.
Right.
Mercedes Lackey does that over and over and over and over and over again.
Yeah. Well, I mean, creating contrast and conflict is the way to get people to see things that they wouldn't ordinarily notice. Right?
Right.
So in a way, one of the things that science fiction is trying to do in general is to disorient readers to their own context.
Well, theoretically, yes, unless you talk to people who are announcing award shows.
Well, right. But I mean, so not everybody agrees that that's one of the purposes, I suppose, of science fiction.
Yeah,
But I
that's
think
and that's one of the things. Like, if you read Michael Z. Williamson, I don't think that's what he's trying to do.
sure. But I think there are a lot of authors who are trying to estrange us from our own assumptions via the method, by using science fiction and fantasy and horror.
And
I don't tend to mention horror because I don't read it, because I am, you know, prone to nightmares.
and it could be subtle, or it could be in your face, or I mean, it depends on how. I mean, like J.Y. Yang's novellas, the Tensoriate novels, have a very different culture as far as how gender and gender identity goes, and it's right in your face. Like, this is not Earth. This is not the way you do it. But it makes you think about, well, how that compares to the way we think about gender and gender identity, and how we choose that by presenting a completely different paradigm that the reader must assimilate.
Then over the years, the shaking up and disorientation that can be done, it shifts, because in one time frame, in one cultural framework, you know, instead, just in the 50s, you pull out something and you throw it at people and it's disorienting, and there's a shift culturally, and 30 years later, it's not going to be as disoriented, because lots of places it's the norm now.
The idea that the discourse becomes familiar.
Yeah, and so part of the problem people might have is that they did something that was disorienting and prize winning and awesome, and they want to keep doing that thing without recognizing that it's not awesome and disorienting and new anymore. And
no, that's actually a really interesting issue, because I think one of the things that I see a lot, especially in earlier science fiction, is stories that are very clear cut, sort of taking a very specific type of metaphor and making it literal, or like enacting it very literally. To, like, these what if scenarios tend to sort of focus on particular things, and they make these clear cut stories that are going to play out this hypothesis in this very specific direction. But that takes me back to the idea of the shared metaphorical database, because the metaphors that got picked were the ones that were core to the metaphorical database, if you know what I'm saying. And so now that we're ranging further afield, people are still writing these types of stories, but maybe using different metaphors. And also complicating the kinds of stories that can be told a little bit more than that.
I think that's correct, because I think as writers get more diverse, like even what we could have imagined out of, if John Campbell decided to write something in a future where the Aztecs ruled space, it's not gonna look anything like what Aliette de Bodar is writing at all.
Exactly.
So they have their set of shared metaphors, and I think the rest of us are swimming in a much bigger pool. And I think that that we are starting to develop shared metaphors as marginalized people that are opaque to those who are not. And I'm going to be interested to see how that works out, because we're going to start to have kind of shared stories of the majority culture, and how we subvert those and what that looks like in a way that we don't currently have, because a lot of the people who are the gatekeepers aren't going to let those be published. So because I'm willing to bet it's out there. It's out there.
Mhm.
It's just not getting any recognition. So we'll see how it goes. But like Samizdat has a long and storied history, and I think we're still in that era right now. Which, you know what I mean by that?
Not quite.
Oh, Samizdat is it's the Russian word for banned print.
Oh, okay.
Okay, yeah,
So
okay,
underground writing.
yeah, like when they were banning mimeographic machines and whatnot.
Sure. Yeah, basically Gulag Archipelago-esque
Yep.
time period. Yep, that's the stuff.
Got it.
Yep.
Cool.
It is. Well, maybe. Yeah.
I really like this direction that we went. This got really interesting. Well, but what's interesting about it is, to me, is that the idea of confusing the reader, we can say, well, we don't want people to be confused, but part of the whole purpose of the genre is to disorient people.
Put them out, take them out of their current existence.
To reorient them. In fact, I wrote a paper a long time ago. It was actually an academic paper about Ursula K. Le Guin's work. And one of the things that basically the thing that I was looking at in her work is the way that she takes things that are completely unfamiliar to us and writes about them as though they are 100% familiar to us. And how she does that, and how well she does that, because she does it really well.
Yeah.
And so, in fact, we often talk about making the familiar strange. But she makes the familiar strange by making the strange familiar. And so I think, in fact, that's it's a tension that is present in a lot of science fiction, where often we want to make the familiar strange, but in order to do that, we make the strange familiar. So that was actually one of the things that I tried to do in my Varan books, is to put you in a place that's very unfamiliar with people who think it's completely normal.
Right, and you put that right at the beginning of the book. This is also your home.
Yeah.
So yeah, you it's like you're inviting the reader to put themselves into that world, to disorient themselves. Well, no, but it's in a texture, and it's an explicitly textual way I don't see in a lot of books. You're explicitly putting that hand out to the reader. Coming to the barn.
And that was actually a last minute thing that I wrote, because I was feeling frustrated by the way that people had articulated with Varan shorter works, and when they commented on them, that they were not understanding what the context was, either just coincidentally or deliberately or whatever. And I was like, you know what? I kind of want to just put something in there that says, here's what this is. This isn't a far future Earth. This isn't a da-di-da-di-da, This is, anyway. And then that little sentence popped out of my mouth, and my editor said, why don't we put exactly that at the beginning? And I'm like, okay. And now it's actually one of my favorite things that we did.
I agree, because I keep quoting it, because I mean that's trying to not disorient the reader by saying, I'm going to orient you, come in. You're not dropping them into the cold open, which would be disorienting the reader, given the complexity and the richness of your culture. But that's kind of like the hand to have them step into the pool rather than having them jump, do the belly flop into the pool.
Yeah, and so I can often tell when people haven't read it. Like, oh, okay. But I'm still glad it's there. And I was so happy with it. In fact, the way it turned out, Amazes the Power, that it's going to be in front of all of the books now. So
That's
Cool.
now a thing.
Yeah, it's now my, it's now my little substitute for like McCaffrey's like little prologue with her star orientation thing.
Yes.
Only much more terse.
And then there's a good, I mean, there's a genre disorientation for the reader in the McCaffrey books where it's kind of set up as fantasy, but the more you look at it and the more you read, like, no, it's actually hard science fiction. So that's a nice.
I'm glad you brought that up, because part of this confusion topic is actually how much do readers expect to have their questions answered?
Yeah, that's a thing.
Oh yeah.
You gotta be really careful with betas about that.
That's a big thing.
Because I know some people who are like, I want everything laid out for me at the very beginning. I want to know what I'm getting into by page 3. And I'm like, you realize that's not how like 98% of science fiction works, right? And they're like, well, no, but I mostly read regular fiction. I'm like, well, then why don't you go over to the regular fiction corner and I'll stay over here. Okay.
Well, it was interesting because I ran across the Analogue's review of Mazes of Power. And one of the things that the reviewer said right up front is, this is one of those full immersion books that drops you into something and expects you to figure it out. And I was like, yeah.
Feature not bug,
Mm-hmm.
But this is I'm kind of having this deal with my stepkid right now, who they are so used to having parents who explain everything in great detail and drop them into the absolute shallowest, warmest end of every pool they possibly can. And I'm like, you know what? Somebody's going to kick them off a very deep dock at some point. Well, how about we build in some, resilience tools here? And so he had this really bad sunburn. He didn't want to do anything with it. And I said, okay. And it was one of those things of, he's overwhelmed. It's been 3 days. It still hurts. He's whiny. I don't want to deal with all this. And I said, okay, let's make it an experiment. You put the aloe on half of your body. You leave it off the other half. Let's see how much better it works in 3 days. And the difference between screwing around in science is writing it down. So take pictures, label them per the day, and let's just do it. And he was like, oh God, I'll totally do that. My girlfriend just looks at me like, how did that just happen? I'm like, because you got to get into their head. You got to go where they are. But it's kind of one of those things of you have to trust the reader enough that they're going to learn to dog paddle before they just drown.
Mm-hmm.
But the other half of that is that as the author,
mm-hmm.
you have to have enough of your own solid gold ovaries to go, sometimes they just drown, Sparky.
Oh, Kate. Okay.
They do. Some people are going to lem your book and it's going to be okay. Because they're not who you were writing for. And that's fine.
Yeah.
This is not 7th grade. Everyone doesn't have to like you.
Yeah. Oh, and they're not going to anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So might as well start there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah. And I think that's actually one of the things that confusion might be a really good thing for, is that if you can't handle this style of writing along with a little bit of frustration, cut everybody's losses now. Yours, the authors, it doesn't matter. Just cut everybody's losses now. Find the person who you don't, whose stuff you don't like you don't like what they read, and offer them that book. Because that might actually work. But yeah, there are uses for things you don't like. It's just that they're not that useful for you.
Yeah.
No, it's true.
Okay, I think I went off on a tangent again. Yes.
No, that's good though.
These are good tangents today.
Yeah.
And I think it's true. I mean, you're telling the story you want to tell. If they want to read a different story, then they should go read a different story.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I think actually the whole point of I think confusion is part of the purpose of a tight point of view.
Mm-hmm.
Limiting the kinds of things that you can see is a principled type of confusion,
Mhm.
right? But
Well, and-
what it does is it reduces overwhelm.
Yes.
Yeah. At the same time.
Simplify, simplify, simplify.
But I think it's
Well,
also
my
one of the
rule is
things-
you only want people to have to understand as much as one person can understand at one time.
that seems very variable.
Well, I mean, but that's when I go into a Varan book, it's like, I'm not going
I
to
see
try
what
to
you're saying.
explain more than this character knows
Yes.
at this time. And then
Mhm.
later I can do a different character and they know a whole other raft of things.
Right.
And then a reader ideally is capable of looking at the intersection and the exclusion on both of those points of view and learn maybe even a third thing that they would not have known otherwise.
Mhm.
You know, so in a way, that's a kind of confidentiality feeling between the author and the reader.
Mhm.
Like, I can convey things that characters don't know to readers by playing with those intersections.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Play up. Yeah, I mean, you can play it in all sorts of ways. Like I'm thinking of the late Gene Wolfe and his Soldier of Sidon series, where the main character loses his memory every day because he's been cursed, and you run into characters that he doesn't recognize, but the reader gets enough clues to figure out, oh, they're back, and he doesn't know it because he doesn't have his memory, and
Mm.
so
Yeah.
the character's more confused than the reader. The careful reader will be able to pick things out and anticipate things that the character only comes to later.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that's a whole other discussion topic. Like, how do you convey things to a reader that your characters are not
Just
aware
do not know. Yes.
Yeah.
That's a big one. And I think one of the big things that we're still dealing with here is that a lot of the confusion happening between readers and authors is that, what I hear you saying, Juliet, is that you tend to expect a lot of your readers.
I do.
And a lot of the readers who are crying right now are the ones who are like, I would just like my hero's journey, and I want to be the hero, and then I want the journey, and then I want to end, and it'll be good, and that's all I want. And I'm like, well, that's great, and you can have your Bicky and your orange juice over here. I'm gonna be reading something else.
I want a character. I want a character that I want a character I can like as my main character. I mean, in one of the panels at WorldCon, Gary K. Wolfe went off on this idea. It's like, I guess you don't read Hamlet or Macbeth. It's like, yeah, he's got a point.
Well, I mean, that's a whole
Kind of a
different
jerk.
topic. Likability is overrated.
Yes, yes, as is electability. But yeah, it is.
Oh boy, ain't that the truth.
Well, and some people are gonna like that, and some people aren't. There's a lot of people in my life that are no longer in my life, by the way, that defended Thomas Covenant, and I got no time for you. And there were people who read the next series after that, and I was like, I didn't like anybody in that series. That's why I stopped reading it. I hated everybody in it. And I gotta be able to like at least one person. If it's the dog, the banana, I don't know, but someone. But yeah, I haven't come up on anything that oh yeah, that was the Werner Vinge thing. I love Vinge, and then he wrote Deepness in the Sky, and I was like, I am never reading another thing that you write. I just hated that, and I don't know why. Because all of my really intellectual friends were like, I touch myself to the thoughts of Ian Banks. And they, yes, I said that, Paul. But they were like, oh, these are so great. I'm like, I hated them. Maybe I'm not as smart as I think I am. I don't know. What?
Oh God, no. No. Okay.
Well, I mean, it's good to remark that not everything is for everyone.
Yes.
That's true.
Not everything works for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, it is after 5, you guys.
Because we're going to end on Kate's note. Well done, Kate.
This is usually not a good thing.
Well, are we less confused?
Suddenly
More
glad
confused?
Ian Banks is dead.
Oh my goodness.
Oh.
Well, all right. Thank you for a wonderful discussion on confusion and multiple aspects thereof. Actually, I always appreciate you guys for your great ability to sort of take a single topic and look at it from all these different kinds of perspectives, including very intriguing and funny ones.
We have lots of camera lenses in our bag.
Next week, I believe Kate Elliott is coming to be on the show.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. Did I break the stream with that? I'm sorry.
So
I
that's
apologize.
going to be super fun, and I'm looking forward to it. And it's going to be at same bat time, same bat channel next Tuesday.
Awesome.
Speaking of common,
Yes, our metaphorical database. Indeed. We'll talk about that. I wrote it down, so we will talk about that in a future episode. All right, you
Cool.
guys, I'm taking us offline.